about the Ethereum, a brief history of Ethereum's future. To talk about Ethereum's history, prehistory, Eth1 2.0, and future ahead, we are joined by Ben Edgington, the product owner for Taipei, a beacon chain client. For those who missed it earlier, beacon chain is expecting its first network upgrade, Altair, very soon. You can learn about what to expect with this upgrade, the key features and client implementation by watching the recording of earlier episodes. Similarly, we have got the overview for London proposals for your awareness. And if you're interested in learning more, check out PEEPanEIP playlist at Ethereum Catalyst YouTube. Thank you for joining, Ben. Because you are on the guest seat this time, may I request you to share a little bit about you, your history for the association with Ethereum and Taipei.
Thank you so much, Pooja. It's wonderful to be with you. I didn't realize this was your 40th episode. This is wonderful. It's going to be a little bit different today, not really talking about EIP, but I'll keep it not too technical. So I got involved with Ethereum something over 5 years ago. It was proof of stake, which really grabbed me and got my attention. And then I just went down the rabbit hole and I joined Consensus almost 4 years ago. I worked in R&D for a while, and now I am product owner of Teku, which is our beacon chain client, as you said. So one way or another, I've been involved in the proof of stake and scalability conversations for about 3 years or so. And we'll see a bit of that as I go through the presentation. I should give a couple of sort of caveats. I wasn't there for everything. This is very much a personal view, partially reconstructed from sort of things that were around at the time and written. Others who were around may have different recollections or emphasize things differently. But this is one of my favorite topics, is looking back at how Ethereum evolves and changes and where we're going and how we got here. So let's take a look at a brief history of Ethereum's future. So first thing to say is Ethereum 2 has a long history. It wasn't invented as a terminology recently, but goes back all the way to 2014. Is the first mention I've been able to find of it. So Vitalik, in this post on Hacker News, you can see the bit I emphasize. This is April 2014. Anticipated releasing Ethereum 2. This was before the release of Ethereum 1. I mean, a year before the Ethereum chain got going. I was already thinking ahead to what comes, after the initial Ethereum chain, and had in mind something with some new cryptographic primitives and other features. The date was a little optimistic, perhaps 2016. We're still not quite there, but you can't fault the vision that Vitalik has, and the kind of hot news is, yeah, it's happening. We're getting there. We are delivering Ethereum 2. So this is the kind of journey I want to go on through this little presentation. Hopefully it won't go on too long. Give me a wave if I'm rambling, and we'll tighten it up. But I kind of see the history as like 4 stages. There's sort of prehistory, what happened before the Ethereum chain was launched in 2015. Then there's what I called the Serenity years, then what I've called the Shasper years, and now we're in the merge years. And these represent different sort of phases or directions of development over time. So we'll start with a sort of prehistory. This is pretty short, just one slide on this. And it's to say that the developers of Ethereum were aware from the very earliest days that the blockchain would face 2 big challenges, one of which is scalability, and the other is sustainability, that proof of work is not long-term sustainable. And so from the Ethereum Foundation blog, here are 2 articles from back in the day. Gav Wood on the left described chain fibers, which is a scalability mechanism. He says he actually came up with it in early 2014, and a very similar time Vitalik was posting on Slasher, which is such a great name, and I'm sad we don't use that anymore, though we do still talk about slashing, so that's pretty good. which is a proof of stake algorithm, even before Ethereum was launched. If you want to dive deeper into the development of the proof of stake as a protocol, I really recommend Vlad Zamfir's History of Casper, which I've linked to, and I think the slides will be available so you can follow the links in your own time. So that's the kind of prehistory. These things were on the agenda from day one: scalability, sustainability. So how did that pan out? Let's look at the Serenity years, and I've really dated these, July 2015, the launch of Ethereum, through June 2018, and you'll see in a moment why I've chosen that date. So this is at the top. This is a blog post by Vinay Gupta, again on the Ethereum Foundation blog, 2015 March. And he talks about the release stages of Ethereum, the upgrade path as the Ethereum Foundation saw it at the time. So it's going to go through 4 stages: Frontier, the initial release, Homestead, Metropolis, and then Serenity. And Serenity was where proof of stake would be delivered and proof of work would be turned off. Again, we see that optimism, which I love so much about the Ethereum community. It's not far away at all. This was in 2015, but it's definitely very much in the plan and to be delivered, proof of stake as Serenity. Interestingly, so scalability seems to have dropped out of this roadmap, at least formally here, but we will come back to that in a moment. So what does this Serenity plan look like? And there were 2 really independent parts to it. On the one hand, you've got the proof of stake side, which is Casper. That's what the mechanism was called. This led to something quite concrete, which was EIP 1011, which we'll look at in a moment. And that activity was happening on the proof of stake side. And on the scalability side, there's this concept of sharding that had emerged out of the chain fibers thing. That didn't really make much progress through this, through the Serenity years. Just started to come to life, that effort towards the end of the period in a Taipei workshop that we held in Taipei, and I'll say a little more about that in a moment. But the critical thing here to understand is that the goal was to implement both of these, both the proof of stake protocol and the scalability protocol, on top of the existing Ethereum chain, so managed by Ethereum. Ethereum is Turing complete. It can, in principle, it can do anything. So why not, run its own proof of stake mechanism and run its own sharding mechanism? So there was supposed to be manager contracts, one for proof of stake and one for sharding, sitting on the Ethereum chain, managing all the validators and the protocol going on. And that was the key part of the upgrade path for Serenity. So this is the only EIP I'm going to talk about in this PEEPanEIP. So you do get to look at one, unfortunately an abandoned one, but there we go. This is EIP 1011, authored by Danny Ryan and Chicheng Liang back in 2018, April. And this was the proposal to build a hybrid proof of stake, proof of work mechanism as a first step towards going to full proof of stake. So the idea is that proof of work continues to run, producing blocks, and proof of stake is an overlay on that, bringing finality, which means you cannot revert proof of work blocks, which protects against a 51% attack happening. So yes, move it out of draft. It says you're right, it's still in draft. So this was a sort of interesting hybrid approach, and the idea being that with the security of proof of stake, you could crank down the rewards for proof of work, reduce the rewards, and thus reduce the hash rate, and overall you get a net benefit in that. I'm not going to say a whole lot about this. The EIP is still there if you want to look at it. I've just picked out one aspect at the bottom, which we'll come back to in a moment, which is that the stake size. So currently it's 32 Ether on the Beacon chain. The stake size in this model is 1,500 ether per validator. So we'll come back to that in a moment. But this actually made quite a lot of progress. I mean, 1011 got prototyped, had a test net, December 31st, 2017, the test net was running. And, you know, there's an explorer there and so on. You can look at the history there. Yeah, we'll come back to that in a moment. So, you know, it made progress and was chugging along. So that's the proof of stake in Serenity. What about the scalability in Serenity? Really, the first sort of kickoff for this was this workshop we had in Taipei. So here are the attendees. You can see some of the usual suspects there. I'm there in the front row, managed to position myself nicely for that one. We got Raoul and Preston from Prism on the right in the front. You got Jacek from Nimbus at the back on the right, and various other characters from the history of Ethereum around. And Xiaowei did a nice write-up of that, which you can link through to there. So that was kind of the closing event, the eve of the Serenity years, because pretty quickly after that Taipei workshop, everything changed again. And we move into what I've called the Shasper years. And I hate this word Shasper, and I'm very pleased it's gone away, but it does, you know, capture the essence of the idea at the time. So I've dated this from July 2018, and that's because we met in Berlin, and we pretty much tore up everything that went before. We started a brand new plan with basically, you know, blank flip chart and designing a whole new protocol. Why did we do this? What was the problem? Well, I mean, number one, 1,500 ETH to stake for a validator was not attractive. I mean, imagine paying $3 million worth of ether to be a staker now. I mean, it's bad enough as it is. But there were other sort of more subtle issues, like, you know, you had one management contract for proof of stake validators and one for sharding validators, and they were separate pools of validators with their own separate stakes. And, you know, the dynamics weren't clear between them, whether people would dominate in one pool or another, and they would leech off each other or not. And it's kind of inefficient having these separating the validator pool. The other thing was that it was realized that far from being able to run this through regular smart contracts on Ethereum, there would actually need to be protocol changes made to sort of prioritize the transactions on the network dealing with proof of stake or sharding. And if you're going to change a protocol anyway, you might as well, you know, go large on it rather than fiddling with it. Danny did a great write-up of the rationale for this, abandoning the sort of previous path, which is linked there. And there were opportunities with building a sort of new chain, starting with a blank sheet of paper. We realized that if we built a beacon chain from scratch, this was an opportunity. This is inspired by Definity's random beacon at the time, threshold relay beacon, which was a really interesting idea. And it sort of sparked a conversation about new cryptographic primitives like aggregate signatures. Now, if there's one thing which enables ETH2 above all others, it's this concept of aggregating signatures from the validators. It's what makes the whole protocol practical. Justin Drake wrote about it in an article I linked to there and sort of brought it to the attention of the Ethereum community. And this really started a new sort of train of thought and a new design process. And we could do things, if we built a new chain, we could combine validator sets for proof of stake and sharding. We're doing the management in protocol rather than in contracts. That's much more efficient. So we can have much lower stake and have many more validators, you know, thousands of times more validators participating in the protocol. And yeah, there are lots of funky ideas floating around. So, you know, building from scratch rather than just trying to modify the existing chain was attractive. So we could kind of fix all the things that had been done wrong on the original Ethereum chain. So that was mid 2018. And basically what we did was we united Casper and Sharding. We came up with this Shasper thing, which is a separate side chain running alongside Ethereum with a view to overtaking Ethereum at some stage. This is Xiaowei's famous iconic diagram, which has served us well over the years. And the sort of architecture is at the top. You've got the current proof of work chain. Then we build a beacon chain and we add shards to it. This says 1024. That was the original plan. That changed to 64 more recently. And then we put execution layer on these shards, which was like EWASM and all sorts of crazy stuff we were talking about doing that. And then eventually we turn off proof of work. And loads of sort of new ideas. This is a sort of chart I made at the time of some of the new ideas that were around that were being thought of importing into the new chain, the beacon chain. And some of them have come to me and some haven't, but the idea was we could do all sorts of experiment with all sorts of things. And we had a sort of roadmap to delivering this. So the plan was 3 phases, very familiar: phase 0, phase 1, phase 2. Phase 0 is build this beacon chain, which is a standalone proof of stake chain, which kind of hooks loosely into the proof of work chain at the top just to onboard new validators, but otherwise just sort of runs itself and doesn't do anything. Then in a later stage, we add data shards, which are just managed blobs of data. And then in phase 2, eventually we put some execution layer on top of this, which is very flexible with cross-shard communication and all of that. And then finally, we import the state of the current proof of work chain into one of these execution environments, or we just like deprecate the proof of work chain and encourage everybody to migrate over. That was a bit unclear through that. So that was the master plan, 3 very nice phases that build on each other to deliver this impressive architecture. And we turn off the proof of work at the top. Different view of the same thing. We have this linear phase 0, phase 1, phase 2, and then eventually we transfer across the Ethereum proof of work chain stuff and shut off proof of work. And yeah, that was a great vision, and a bunch of us kind of got going on this. I made this slide in 2018, back in November then, and it's interesting what's changed, and actually not so much. So these are the teams that kind of got involved at the time, mostly still involved. So some changes. The Ethereum Foundation sort of abandoned their own in-house Python client, just wasn't performant enough. And focused on developing the specs and the testing and so forth. Their parity dropped out fairly early on, but otherwise we're all still involved one way or another. The Harmony team came into Pegasus, which is my team. They joined us and are working, really leading the prototyping of the merge and sharding now. On the research side there. And when I wrote this slide, we hadn't even started building Teku. Still says Pantheon, which is our Eth1 client name. I guess we imagined we might fork that and build Teku on top of that. But we pretty soon got building. We built initially as Artemis and then changed the name to Teku. Yeah, and everyone else is still stuck in and going strong. And then 2 years later, we launched the beacon chain, 1st of December last year. And honestly, 2 years from starting to build a client with a kind of clean slate to delivering in production is incredibly fast. I know that everyone is like, oh, when Eth2 is taking forever and, you never deliver and blah, blah, blah. But honestly speaking, that from a standing start in 2 years to full production is astonishingly fast for a project of this complexity. So I'm very proud of that. So that was the Shasper years. And I think a lot of people still have that mental model of, where Eth2 is going and how it's going to be delivered, and aren't fully aware that things have changed somewhat in recent months. I've kind of dated it 2021. I mean, it's, you know, there's no single date where we change plans. It just sort of has evolved over the past few months. Yeah, what happened? Well, pressures, I think, pressures and opportunities. So one of which was an increasing urgency around delivering proof of stake. So the day I first presented this slide, Elon Musk had just tweeted his thing about Bitcoin and the environment, but I've left it in there. There's this whole thing about miners' power and the kind of fighting about EIP 1559 and all of that kind of turned people against the proof of work mining community. We've got the whole environmental optics. You know, my daughter gives me a hard time about NFTs, and you know, I tell her you know, I want to kill proof of work. You know, you should support me. We're moving away from all that. So she's happy now. And of course, we're paying too much for our security. I mean, you know, 2 ETH per block is more than we need to be paying for the security that we get. And on the other hand, we've got this new opportunities, and there are always new technologies emerging. And that's the exciting thing about Ethereum. We spot new technologies and we adopt them and absorb them, and it's flexible enough to do so. So two things emerged, one of which was Vitalik's post, which captured something that was already happening, which is this roll-up centric vision. And the idea is that you take a lot of the load for scaling out of the protocol, out of the blockchain itself, and you take that elsewhere, layer 2, we call it. So things like managing the parallel state and managing parallel execution can be done outside the protocol. And we have this nice roll-up thing, which we understand the properties of and the security. And that simplifies what you need to do in protocol. You don't need to have executable shards anymore. You can just provide data shards, and that plays very nicely with roll-ups. So that sort of took away an emphasis from delivering these execution environments. And then Mikhail, my colleague in Consensus, kind of put the nail in the coffin with his executable beacon chain proposal, which just provided a roadmap to very quickly getting to proof of stake. So rather than waiting until we developed phase 0, phase 1, phase 2, and then do some kind of transfer to proof of stake, turn off proof of work, we could actually do it very quickly, and then do the other things later, you know, do sharding after proof of stake. So those two things came along and really evolved the roadmap. Here it is sort of pictured. So instead of this proof of work going along in parallel right to the end and then coming in, we do this merge quickly. We have the proof of stake chain, which is the beacon chain. We bring the proof of work, we kind of unite them in this merge. We add sharding, and then we just have Ethereum scalable, sustainable with rollups. There. Different view. This is where we are today. Proof of work chain at the top. We have this beacon chain running, which is not doing much except looking after itself. In the merge, we bring the proof of work blocks into the beacon blocks and turn off proof of work. And then we add the shards on top of that, and we're done. That's the whole architecture. So that's it. We've done the prehistory, we've done the Serenity years, we've done the Shasper years and the merge years. If I've got a couple of moments left, then I have some sort of reflections and thoughts about how this process has gone, because it can seem a bit bewildering, honestly, I think, to people who try to follow this space. And in my old life, I used to make technology roadmaps. You know, customers would demand a 3-year roadmap, you know, 1 year committed, 3 years indicative, and all this. And this sort of flexibility was not available. So I kind of liken it to the Linux roadmap. This goes back a long way. I don't know if Linux still behaves like this, but the Linux famously never had a roadmap and sort of evolved in a very similar way to the way that Ethereum is evolving. So there's some nice stuff there. I wrote a little while back about the bizarre development model. So this is there's a famous open source essay by Eric Raymond about called The Cathedral and the Bizarre, contrasting closed source cathedral models, which are very well ordered and hidden from public view, and you get handed down the fruit of the work, much like, say, Dfinity is now. You know, they went away for 3 years. Nobody had closed source. Nobody had any idea what they're doing. They just handed down from the cathedral their fully finished product. Instead, Ethereum's development is like, you know, crazy bizarre, with everyone shouting at each other and kind of bringing order from chaos. And, you know, this is where the cat herders really have their work cut out. But the idea is that it's a marketplace of ideas, and it's open. Anyone can come and participate. Everything is visible, and it's much more kind of flexible and organic. So, but the result is you don't end up with a nice, well-ordered roadmap, right? I mean, it's creative and it evolves over time. It's not set in stone with dates and deliverables. I like the way Vitalik thinks. This is much more my kind of roadmap. This is his sort of post. It's a while back now. It's a little bit old now, but you know, proper roadmaps look like they're messy and complex and aspirational, and there's not a date to be seen on it, which I like. And this is Ethereum. It emerges from this sea of ideas. Final word, the inspirational quote for the day. This is Vitalik, like 7 years ago. We will either solve the scalability and consensus problems or die trying. I think we're solving it. I don't think we're dying. I think we're getting there. Okay, that's enough from me. Shall we do some Q&A? I'll stop sharing for now.
Thank you so much for presentation. This was like stunning presentation. It makes so much sense to connect the dots between Eth1, Eth2, the history, merge, and what we are expecting in the future. Although you have answered to most of the questions on your way of presentation, but I'm sure there would be some more. So yeah, anyone from the group who would like to go ahead?
Yeah, actually I have one question. So first off, awesome presentation. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the name of the presentation. I thought that was really clever. Are there any other currencies that are doing a similar process that you all, or is the kind of like project management that's been going on with respect to the ETH2 transition, is this like unique to Ethereum?
Yeah, that's a super question. I really don't know. I only follow Ethereum very closely. My impression is that others tend to be a bit more closed, you know, like Polkadot and others. But, you know, if I were a member of their communities, I might see it being much more open. So it's kind of hard to answer from where I sit. But it has been a defining characteristic of Ethereum that it is very open to anybody coming, and you know, you just have to come and do something useful and immediately you're accepted. And that almost seems unique. I mean, I can't say for sure, but it's, you know, we're very, very committed to that. It's not like a aspiration, it's reality. I mean, it's what we do, and we fight for that openness.
Yeah, I mean, I think I definitely have experienced that. I don't know anything about Ethereum, but I'm doing a lot of work in it. So like, or at least I didn't a year ago, I was brand new. So kind of going off of that then, where do you see, when the merge happens, do you see that there will be a change in the way that things are handled throughout Ethereum? I know that the way that, for example, the all-core dev meetings happen right now versus the ETH2 meetings, there's a distinct difference. And I'm wondering if you think that you'll sort of be merging those methodologies as well.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I think about this a lot. So Ethereum has its own governance process, and it can seem very, very slow, as you well know. And, you know, I often cite things like it took 3 years to get bit shifting into the EVM, and even the EIP 1559 is well over 2 years old. And it can seem very ponderous, whereas on the ETH2 side, we've moved extremely fast and loose. We've had very informal governance, basically. Yeah, we just kind of get on with it and make changes and so forth. Now, we've had a luxury, though. We haven't been managing, $300 billion worth of value on our chain, whereas, the Ethereum proof of work chain has this enormous accrued value, which has to be curated very, very carefully. We're now moving into territory on the Eth2 side, on the proof of stake side, where we have stakers. So not quite as much value, but I think it's something like 6 million ETH staked, which is what, 12-13 billion dollars worth. And we've got to be mindful of that and curate that well. And as the two come closer together, I think we will have to adopt much more careful governance practices, much more like what the Ethereum is doing today, the all-core devs. So EIPs will be created for the merge. Technically, we could do the merge, really quickly. I mean, we could probably do it in a few weeks. The blocker is the governance process between now and delivery, and rightly so, because we have a whole community of stakeholders, people who have invested in different ways in Ethereum, who have to be certain that this is going to be safe and is not going to break their thing and lose the money and cause problems for them. So we have this, I don't know how long it's going to take. I hope it doesn't take more than 6 to 9 months, but it's mostly around the governance and the testing and the proving that this is going to work from now on. And I think for a lot of the devs on the ETH2 side, that's going to come as a shock, honestly, how slowly things are going to move from now on. I'm proud that Teku team has Eth1 developers in it, but none of the other teams do. And I think it's going to be a different experience going forward.
Do you think that there's like a future for that process developing into something more scalable to an extent? Because I mean, I think a big part of the problem is just it's the all-core dev call, right? And that's like the only place that it happens. But I don't know if like there's any talk about that in the ETH2 side on how to like speed up the process, or even just like, and this is probably the last question with regards to governance from me, but like, do you see any way to speed that up?
I think it would be, we would be out of order coming to the Ethereum all core devs and telling them how to run things. I think there's a lot of respect for that work. And whilst we may have some sort of frustrations with the pace of the process, and no doubt there are ways in which it could be accelerated, generally things get done. And it would be impertinent for us to kind of just come in and say, okay, guys, you're doing it all wrong. We've got much better idea. So I don't think we're going to do that. Tim is kind of settling into the role as chair of all core devs. I know him very well. We were colleagues for some time in Consensus, and I trust his instincts and that he will work to make the process as efficient and safe as possible.
For what it's worth, like there are a lot of process that we are trying to learn from the Eth2. One of those, of course, is the EIP process that you mentioned. If not directly for the code proposals, we are considering at least for networking layers and other proposals. So it's a good learning the way both chains are interacting and moving ahead. We hope to have some process like in place. But I may have a follow-up question on that. With the merge coming up and these two chains, like consensus layer and this execution layer working in parallel, do we see the upgrades going on like together simultaneously or different, like we have London Altair right now?
Interesting. We are keeping the consensus layer and the execution layer quite separate. So, the way the merge works is these existing consensus clients, the Eth2 clients, and the existing execution clients, Eth1 clients, basically are only minimally changed. So you run Teku and Geth or something like that and connect them together. So the protocols are quite independent of each other, and in principle can be dealt with separately or with loose coordination between the layers. Now, there are some things where we have to coordinate and that will affect both layers, but it could be that we've got a lot of work to do still on the consensus layer. The whole sharding piece needs to be done, never mind withdrawals and so forth. So we may wish to have a faster cadence of forks and development on the consensus side than on the execution side, as traditionally done. That's speculation on my part, but I could see that as a possible outcome.
Interesting. Yeah, we see that with this merge and both the chains, there are going to be a lot of changes. One of the changes that we are actually seeing right now is the importance of validators for Ethereum 1.0 chain. One of the key stakeholders are miners. Similarly, we have validators. And I believe that they are playing major role. Is there any potential threat that is always being considered whenever we are thinking of beacon chain? Say, for example, when we are talking about 1.0 chain, we consider 51% attack, miner colluding together and something like that. Is there anything related to validators?
Centralization is always a problem for control of the network and so on. So it's always something that we're trying to design the protocol around, not to have too many centralizing pressures. So just mining power is concentrated in a few pools, and in principle they can cause trouble for the network. So and it's the same if too few entities control the majority of validators on ETH2. And it's really hard to design around. So the goal is to make it as easy or as to disadvantage as little as possible those who wish to stake individually, so that there is a minimal disadvantage to people who, to entities like exchanges who are running huge validator pools. Now, I'm not sure that we're really fully succeeding at this. There are definitely centralizing pressures. There are things like, if you stake with Lido, for example, you get a DeFi token back, stake ETH, ST ETH, which then you can put into DeFi and so on. And that's very attractive to people, right? Whereas my ETH that I've staked on my own node, running here, is completely inactive. There's nothing, no derived value I can get from that. So that's really hard to defend against. And the other threat is sort of MEV, minor extractable value, or maximum extractable value, also could favor large operations that have the resources to identify the extractable value most efficiently, whereas the individual like me is going to struggle to extract as much value, puts me at a disadvantage, and is a pressure to join the big pools. So again, we're looking at ways to sort of minimize the unfairness, level the playing field as much as we can. But that's the kind of threat. I mean, if to sort of answer your question sort of more directly, those are the kind of threats that I worry about, are the centralizing things. Ideally, people who are massive stakeholders on Ethereum won't want to be bad actors, because basically they are destroying the asset that they're staking. So in that sense, it's different from proof of work mining. So the interests of stakers are aligned with the interests of all the network users in proof of stake, which does definitely help from a security model point of view.
Thank you. William, if you have some question you want to go ahead with?
Okay, cool. There've been so many different topics here. It's like hard to know exactly where to zoom in. Maybe one thing that I'll kind of rehash that was talked about before, some differences that we've seen in the ETH1 vis-a-vis the ETH2 space. One comment that I've heard is the difference in structure, even between, sorry about that background noise, about the difference in the structure between, say, the All Core Devs meeting and the Ethereum 2 meetings. And I was struck by what you said before. Do you think that that is actually two different approaches to handling the development, or is it more like you're saying that we're actually looking at things that are in two different stages of existence that all core devs are like their job is working on a protocol that has been defined and is currently working and is currently holding value versus the Ethereum 2 movement until now, which at least until the beacon chain was still in the theoretical and working towards closing on a spec.
Yeah, exactly. I think we're at different stages. So we can proceed in a less cautious way on the proof of stake side of things, and we've been able to run more experiments and not be so concerned about breaking things. So it's a maturity question, and inevitably, as the value of what we are guarding grows, then our processes will have to mature along with that. Yeah, and there are probably different approaches that could be taken to governance. It doesn't necessarily have to look like all core devs does today, but it will inevitably be more cautious, I think is the good word for this, than we have had to be so far in developing the beacon chain side of things.
Very interesting. And I guess kind of on that note about kind of the confluence of Eth1 and Eth2, you've talked about how the Eth1 and the Ethereum 1 clients and Ethereum 2 clients are largely dealing with protocols that are independent of each other. Do you think that we're going to continue to see separate like Eth1 and Eth2 clients, or do you feel like that's something that's going to converge also? Like I know Nethermind, for instance, seems to be working on a hybrid 1 and 2. At least to the best of my understanding.
It's something we're looking at in consensus, because we have in-house Eth1 client Besu and Eth2 client Teku, and we're sort of exploring whether there is some advantage to more tightly coupling them. Teku will work with any Eth1, any execution client. That's our kind of commitment. So you could couple Teku with Geth or Nethermind or Aragon or whatever. But there may be some advantage, and in particular for our target user with Teku is the institutional staker, so who is running a large staking operation. And it may be that they wish to kind of single source their infrastructure, so they don't want to have to deal with problems that occur in Geth have to be reported to one place, and problems that occur in Teku have to be reported to another place, and everyone starts finger pointing. It may be that we package Teku and Besu in such a way that it's looks like a unified client, and then our users then just have the one entity to deal with. So we're sort of thinking about that, so that there are packaging issues, and there's sort of how do we tightly couple them? It's not clear to me that there are strong advantages to tightly coupling the execution and consensus side of things. But that may change as time goes on. So we're having those conversations now.
Interesting. And I guess kind of as one last question, one of the really interesting things that you've pointed out is that there was an eye on the scaling issues and the consensus algorithm issues already from the earliest days. Do you see an E3 somewhere? I mean, probably eventually there will be problems that show themselves. We probably will eventually need to move forward from something. I doubt anyone's willing to claim that this is like the algorithm that shall last 1,000 years or something like that. But can we see now maybe what something like an Ethereum 3 would look like, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think Vitalik might even have used the words Ethereum 3. I think during the Scaling Ethereum hackathon presentation, it might have been, he mentioned Ethereum 3. There are things we will have to do if we think quantum computing is going to break our algorithms. Currently, the cryptography we're using is vulnerable to assumed quantum computers, which, depending on who you talk to, are a decade or 3 decades away. So in that time, we will need to move to some sort of post-quantum cryptography. This probably means Starks, which are a kind of zero knowledge proof. Speaking of which, there are very cool things you can do with zero knowledge proofs, which will, can potentially help the protocol a great deal. So yeah, that might be an Ethereum 3 side of things. There's Justin Drake's famous VDF verifiable delay function to introduce strong randomness, not planned for on the current sort of roadmap, but maybe coming later. There's Casper CBC, which is Vlad Zamfir's original sort of Casper consensus mechanism. Our consensus mechanism today is kind of a nasty Frankenstein bolting together of Casper FFG and LMD Ghost. They're two different consensus mechanisms sort of bolted together, and it causes a bit of a discontinuity. You can definitely see the joins, whereas Casper CBC is much purer, and there may be ways to adopt that. So yeah, there's just this whole sort of ocean of ideas. And then there's a whole statelessness discussion around Ethereum. I don't know if we bucket that in with Eth2 or what we call it, but yeah, the whole protocol is moving forward, and that's the thing I love about working in Ethereum rather than, say, Bitcoin. And we're always moving, always aspiring, always got better places to go.
So I'll jump in a little bit about the statelessness. First off, do you mind explaining what you mean by statelessness?
Yeah. So at the moment, if I run an Ethereum node, I have to store locally basically the whole state, which is everybody's account balances, all the contracts, all the contract data. This is quite a lot of data. I forget how big it is, but it's order 100 gigabytes plus. This is slow to access. It slows down nodes because they have to, every time they interact with this state, they have to do many disk operations. And it grows unboundedly. It never shrinks. It just grows and grows. So it's a problem forever. It's basically, you pay once to put data onto the blockchain, and it's there forever. And that model's not sustainable. There are various ways which might be, this problem might be worked around. The current leading candidate is something called state expiry, which means that we store maybe a couple of years worth of state, and then older state gets deleted locally, but you can always recreate it. You store enough stubs of data locally that you can rebuild. If you need to access it, you can ask the network, in Fura or somewhere, for the data that you need, and you can prove that it's correct. You don't need to store it locally. There are more radical versions of this which are fully stateless. And there are protocols. I think the Mina protocol, which used to be called Coda, is completely stateless. They have a very, very cool sort of operating model. But there are things out there, but the leading candidate seems to be this state expiry thing, and it's just reducing the burden on nodes so that we can allow as many people as possible to run nodes. You don't have to have big iron, a server farm to run a Ethereum node. You can run it on consumer equipment.
So sort of building off of that, one major thing that I don't know if this is a major problem, but just the general size of Ethereum and the idea that as Ethereum scales, the size grows exponentially, right? Or I guess equivalently to how much activity there is, because we need to maintain the entire history of the blockchain. Is that a concern, do you think? Or is this stateless approach also tackling that? Because we would have, terabytes or petabytes of data in the cloud to an extent.
Yeah, sharding, makes it worse because you have all the shard data to deal with as well. So you've got state and you've also got history, and they're different things. So the block history, somebody somewhere should store it, but I don't need the block history locally to do most of what I need to do, with an Ethereum node. So probably not everyone needs to store it. And one of the things which will be critical to Ethereum 2 in a scalable sharded world will be light clients. So these are clients that can go to the network and they can ask via gossip protocols for certain pieces of data, and they get that data back from other nodes, and they can prove that it's correct. They know that they've got the right data because it matches the information that they already have. So that and Ethereum too has been designed to be light client friendly. So one of the reasons we're doing this Altair upgrade in a little while is to introduce a way for light clients to sync up to the network quickly. So that's a first step in having a sort of thriving light client protocol. That means that as long as somebody somewhere stores the history and the state, I don't need to know it to do what I need to do. I can just ask the network for the bits and pieces that I need. How we incentivize that has still kind of got to be worked out, but there might be micropayments for providing bits of state and so forth. And you don't need to trust anyone because you can prove that you've got the right piece of information. So you could have something like Infura that specializes in offering the bits of state that people ask for. So yeah, that's the kind of directions that we're moving in.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. Like almost proof of like, I think I looked at the archiving nodes, and if I'm not mistaken, archive nodes, which are people who have the full state, they are not compensated, I don't believe, right?
Yeah, so archive nodes sort of have the full history and the full history of the states as well, which is kind of useful if you're running a block explorer, but not for much else. And in Ethereum currently, there's no incentive to do that unless you need it to, run some other app or something like that. So yeah, incentivization is an interesting issue, and I think hopefully when the protocol can deliver it, then a marketplace will emerge. The Eth1 protocol as is isn't great with light clients. It's just not designed really to serve light clients efficiently. So that marketplace hasn't sprung up. Whereas in Eth2, we're doing that from the ground up. So that's the hope and expectation.
Thank you.
On the stateless side, just for people who aren't aware, there is this very good presentation by Vitalik on state expiry, and that is available to the calendars. We have created a playlist of all these meetings. But it's a good watch for people who would like to learn more about statelessness. Okay, we are getting very close to an hour. Alita, if you may have any final question you want to ask.
No. All good. Thank you very much, Ben.
All right. Thank you so much, Ben, for taking out time and talking to us about all these interesting events and history of Ethereum. And obviously we see merge coming closer with this. London is expected, I believe, in 3 weeks, and Altair would be there soon too. I hope this episode that we recorded today is gonna help a lot of people understand where do we actually stand, because there's a lot of confusion around Eth1, Eth2, and many people still believe that POS is not there around. So I believe that it's going to help.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Pooja and Cat Herders. Thanks for your great work around the place.
On this note, for all our YouTube viewers, thank you for watching. And if you like the episode, do hit like and share it with people, because we need to let the Ethereum community know about this awesome history. As usual, we'll be looking forward to your feedback. You may leave a comment, and if you have any question and you would like to reach out to the guest, the description section contains all the information for Ethereum cat herders as well as guests. We have many more interesting proposals coming up, interesting topics in future. Merge is obviously going to be one of those. So stay tuned, keep watching, keep sharing your love with Ethereum cat herders. This is all of us signing out.